My name is Nicholas Sperling. I'm joining from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coquitlam, Katzie, and Kakite First Nations. I want to thank all of you who are participating on this panel and who've joined us for what I consider to be a very important conversation around visibility. So tonight we're going to be exploring the topic of visibility, and I've tried to compile a panel of folks who are going to provide a variety of different perspectives. And I think we have an incredible group of people who are joining us today. Tonight, my role involves hosting this discussion on visibility for Trans Day of Visibility, which I think you probably all know today is. And I became outspoken and visible when I was outed as a trans woman publicly in the news when I ran in the 2017 provincial election. I'm now working as a social justice ambassador. I volunteer as an advocate for a variety of different social issues, such as LGBTQIAS2+ rights, general affordability. That's a huge issue these days. I also run a construction company. I've been involved in politics, running in 2 provincial elections and 1 municipal election. And I share a lot of the different things that I do on social media, as well as my mental health struggles. I think part of being visible on social media for me is about trying to portray a more realistic image of my life, as opposed to a very curated one that can make other people maybe feel insecure about their own lives. I don't want to perpetuate that. But enough about me. I want to open up the floor to Tara, who is a cisgender researcher and ally, and who will make a short statement. And Tara's been working in the field of intersectional rural research for 15 years with a passion for social justice issues and empowering voices who continue to be ignored. Recent queer-related work includes understanding inequities for the queer community in accessing active transportation and to the barriers to gender diverse and LGBTQ2S+ individuals for running for local government. She's here to talk about what being an ally in rural research can look like. So Tara, would you like to introduce yourself and explain what you'd like to?
Why am I here? Why do we have a cis person talking, right? Thank you so much, Nicola. I do really appreciate it, and to Divine for putting this on. I understand I am taking up space right now, and I do not take that for granted. So thank you for allowing me to be here and talk a little bit about my work and what allyship can mean. I did, like Nicola said, I've been working in this field for around 15 years now, just over that. My work began when I lived up in northern Manitoba. And so I had to learn very quickly how to embed Indigenous views into my research, into policy, and into any programs I was working on. So that really became a founding piece of my career, and where I ended up really learning how to start listening to people. I now live in Rossland, which is in the southern interior of BC. It's this really neat area where we have the confluence of the Columbia and the Kootenay rivers. We have 4 unceded traditional territories that overlap here. It's a rich area, or traditionally had been a rich area for gathering, for fishing, and for just cultural trading. So we have the Tsanaha, the Secwepemc, Sahilks, and the autonomous Sinaiks. The autonomous Sinaiks are one of the nations that actually had permanent villages along the Columbia River prior to being dammed. And as a result of some of the research that I'm doing right now that Nicola had mentioned with the city of Rossland, they have an MOU with the autonomous Sinaiks. And I had the absolute serendipitous pleasure of just last week chatting with Elder Marilyn James on what being Two-Spirit means to the Sinaiks. And if you're not aware, Two-Spirit means different things across every nation. It can mean different things to villages, to different bands. And it doesn't necessarily mean being trans, although sometimes that can be very similar. Often it just means being able to express yourself and express themselves how they choose to. And that was the big thing with the Sinaik story, with the Two-Spirit culture, was it was just an acceptance of people, of how people wanted to express themselves, whether that was male or female, a combination or nothing. It was a spiritual and internal belief. And the community just embraced and accepted that as the norm. And so I think about that autonomy when I do my work. And like I said, go back to listening and listening to voices. At best, voices are often ignored by the power and the decision makers that be. More often, they're belittled or actively erased from any type of process. And again, it's about the listening to people. It's not about giving somebody a voice. I can't give any of you a voice here. That's not my role because you all have a voice. But what I can do is listen to it and then amplify that up, embed them into policies, and hope for long-term systemic changes. And so when I think about intersectionality or gender-based analysis plus, some of you may be aware of that term, it really is about empowerment. It's about listening to people to provide an agency and control over one's life. And when we have an agency over our own lives, it gives us choices, which gives us freedom. And so some of my work that I am doing right now is about increasing gender and gender diverse people within local governments. And I did look at some research around active transportation in rural British Columbia. And when I think about allyship in my work, it really means the understanding the contextual and influencing factors that exist beyond what we're looking at in this little tiny little microcosm of whatever research question is. And it means these contexts. I can't separate out my work and my personal life. I can't be an ally in my professional life and not be an ally in my personal life. And so what I've taken from that experience and my research is the need to truly undertake my own self-learning. I need to show up at events like this. I need to educate myself on changing some of my patterns of behaviors like pronouns and learning how to introduce myself with pronouns. I need to recognize that allyship occurs at both the organizational, institutional levels. And so that's where I can start embedding things like policies and ensuring that our governments are using gender neutral terms in any of their legislation that they put out. But again, it's about not relying on somebody else to teach me. And when I develop policies and recommendations for my work, I'm always embedding, you need to start with yourself. You can't wait on somebody else to teach you. You have to take that responsibility on and learn and grow before you can be teaching anyone else. That's my time for today. Thanks, Nicola.
Hey, thank you very much for providing that perspective, Tara. I think it's valuable that we hear from allies as well as trans people. And obviously today is focused on trans and non-binary folks. And that is what our panel is going to be. But I wanted to invite you to provide sort of a different perspective to start us off with. So I'm going to switch focuses now, and I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists for this evening. We have Lara Ray, who is a transgender woman, a comedian, and the founding artistic director of the Winnipeg Comedy Festival. She's a longtime contributor to CBC, including many appearances on The Debaters. A television and radio writer, she's been nominated 3 times for a Canadian Comedy Award and once nominated for a Gemini Award for her work on Little Mosque on the Prairie. We also have Joey White, who is a transgender man known as Cuppa Joey online. He's a 29-year-old transgender queer bear and social media personality. Joey's TikTok describes him as your favorite kind of trans fat. He uses his platforms on TikTok and YouTube to make people laugh, to call out transphobic and fatphobic individuals, and to educate people on the realities of being trans and fat. Then we have Jade Weeks as a transgender woman, a father, an audio engineer, a cinematographer, a YouTuber, a multi-instrumentalist, a singer-songwriter, and a Peruvian-born Canadian. Jade runs Support the Scene, an organization dedicated to bringing light to independent musicians, and she performs as a bassist for the band Fallen Stars and a guitarist for the band Blood of the Phoenix. Then we have Amanda Knox, a non-binary person who uses the pronouns she, they. Amanda is an award-winning journalist, a best-selling author, a human rights advocate, a public speaker, and an Order of Ottawa inductee. In early 2014, their middle child came out to the family as trans, shifting the focus away of their mom's career towards LGBTQ plus rights and education. Their wife came out as trans a few months later. Their middle child began identifying as non-binary, and now so does Amanda. And last but not least, we have Amita Kuttner, who is a non-binary person who uses the pronouns he, they. Amita holds a PhD in astronomy and astrophysics from the University of California, Santa Cruz. Their research focused on Black holes, wormholes, quantum effects, and the early universe. Amanda co-founded and served as director for Moonlight Institute, a nonprofit that develops climate, tech, and decolonial policy, as well as frameworks for a just and equitable future. Amanda has been active in politics for years and is now the interim leader of the Green Party of Canada. And I'm going to start this panel by posing a question to all of our panelists. So the format of this is going to be one question that all of our panelists will have a chance to answer. And then I've tailored specific questions to each of our panelists following that. So I'm going to open it up for a round to answer this first question. And we'll start with Laura Ray, and then I'll call on each panelist individually to answer this question. And then following that, I'm going to pose two questions to Jade because Jade has to leave a little bit early. So we're going to allow her to have a chance to speak to these two questions that I have. And then we'll move on with the format of having one question per panelist, and then we'll come back around and I'll ask another question. And then we're going to open the panel up for questions from the audience. Right now, we're running about 5 minutes ahead of schedule. So I think we're going to be good as far as timing, but we're going to be flexible throughout all of this, and hopefully we can get some good answers from everyone. So the first question that I have for all of you is, you seem to be fairly open about your life struggles, and I really appreciate how you normalize portraying a more realistic and human side of yourself to the world. But I also know that doing so puts yourself in a vulnerable position. So what is your motivation for sharing more personal details of your life, as opposed to presenting a curated or seemingly perfect version of yourself to the world? And Laura, if you'd like to answer that question first.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's an extraordinarily important question. One primarily, I would say, is intensely personal. It has to do with mental health, which is that to curate and only present that image of yourself then gets the kind of false validation that is kind of dangerous for someone like me. And so part of it is the more honest and authentic I am in all parts of my life, the better my mental health is. The other is, as someone who transitioned in the public light, I was already had some, national reputation as a comedian. I knew that there was no way that I could.
Oh, Laura, you've just gone on mute somehow.
I was kind of already in the public eye, so I knew that that was going to be something that I would confront. And obviously, one of the things I want to do is be a good role model for trans people. But because, I transitioned at 52 and I had a life and career, and as a white person, I had so much privilege, and being in the arts, there was very few hiccups in terms of employment and so on that I really experienced. And so I'm so consciously aware of how remarkable my experience is compared to other people. And so on the one side, I'm always feeling a necessity to really check that privilege and assert that my experience is not that common. And then at the same time, that even with all that privilege, I have been attacked. I have been gone through all sorts of travails. And so I want to share that as well. We can't just talk about the grief and the murders and the tragedy. We do have very full lives, and I think that the more people see that, I think it really normalizes our experience and makes people understand that we're no different than anybody else.
Thank you very much. I think that was a really good explanation of why it's important to be visible, but in a way that allows us to show sort of a real side to ourselves. Joey, what would you have to say to this question?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you very much for inviting me on. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I think the main thing is it comes down to representation. In that I grew up in the 90s, And unfortunately, the only representation I saw of anybody trans was Jerry Springer, first and foremost, which we all know is absolutely terrible and was just putting us as like a modern day bedlam to throw tomatoes at. You know, it wasn't any kind of accurate representation. And I remember feeling very confused and conflicted and not knowing why all these different feelings existed. And then as I grew up and I learned about transness, and there was so much that I thought, why didn't I know this before? It would have explained so much. And I thought, if I'm not going to find a representation, I'll do it myself. I will be out there and say, look, this is what it's like to be a big trans guy. This is the reality of it. And similarly, I know that I am very privileged in that I'm a white British man. I hate the phrase cis passing, but I do experience male privilege in everyday situations now. And if I had that opportunity only later, then things definitely would have been a lot different. And the problem that I find with a lot of representation that we do have is that it seems to just end the second we've reached the standards that they want us to reach. That as soon as people look a certain way, as soon as people, pass according to cis standards, it's like that your trans story's over. And it's like, well, no, we're still here. We've still got lives, and it doesn't stop as soon as the transition stops. And I think it's really important to show that. And just because whenever there's going to be a little Joey watching, I want them to know you can live a trans life and that it's going to be okay. And that's what it comes down to.
Great. Thank you very much. I think that was a very succinct answer, and definitely you're providing much better representation than Jerry Springer ever did.
Yeah, for those that don't remember, we're all old, but for the younger people, every Jerry Springer was the same. It began, "These supermodels have a secret you won't believe." That was every single episode. And then, of course, the big reveal would be that they were trans, and then the audience would go apeshit. That was every episode.
Yeah, that was a rough time. Jade, what's your perspective on this question?
Well, to me, I remember when I started transitioning, I wanted to vlog it and to to put it on YouTube. And I joined a bunch of Facebook trans groups, and I wrote that, I want to start vlogging, and, I'm excited about it. And I remember 5 minutes later, someone commented and was like, "You shouldn't do this. People will find you and find out about you," and like gave me a lot of fear and anxiety about being open and putting myself out there in the world. But I quickly realized that yes, they have every reason to give me warnings, because things are tough when you're being yourself and authentically you and putting your journey out there. It's not, you have to be open for criticism. You have to be open to, just as we saw people going into our panels and bombing us with all this kind of stuff. You have to be ready for that, and it's something that I felt excited about. And so I really think you have, like, I feel like I'm so privileged having grown up in a smaller town and then with a great childhood. And then my transition's been great with a strong musical community that backs me with everything I do. Once again, in the arts, where I haven't had to, face a lot of discrimination with my employment. I've been very privileged, and I want to put it out there, and I want to not just only be a representation to other trans community members or people that are thinking about, their own transition, but also for people that know me or that are meeting me outside of the trans community, that I might be their first or their only trans person that they've ever met. I want to help them understand we are real people. We deserve to be here. We're not going away. And just to love us for who we are. And to me, I think that's allows me to put myself out there 100% fully all the time.
Thank you. I think there's definitely this idea that trans people are, one sort of thing, and we're, we our identity is wrapped up in being trans. So it's really great that you're able to show people that, there's more to you than that, and that's, part of who you are. But you're a real person, and there's so many things that like your music and your YouTube videos and all of that, which we'll get to a little bit later. So next we have Amanda. What is your response to this question?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. I've been excited about this all day. I came about this really organically. So for people who don't know our story, I mean, you covered a lot of it in my intro, but I had a blog. I just had like this little sort of like mommy blog, right? And I was sort of locally known, maybe a little bit beyond that. And when our child came out to us, I was going to shut the blog down because I didn't want to out my child. And they said at 11 years old, please don't do that, because it took me an extra long time to come out to you, because in 2014, they were telling us there were just no examples of affirming parents, very, very few. And so I think that you need to keep talking about what it looks like to support me. And so we had a lot of talks about privacy and a lot of talks about like, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. And I was so worried, but we did it anyway. And then I didn't know, oops, that my wife was trans, because she hadn't told me yet. And I also just thought, great. So we're just I'm going to put this, I'll put this on my blog, and then the people who read me and maybe people who specifically go searching for this will find it, and that'll be it. And I had no idea of the attention that it was going to get. And then suddenly we were kind of known around the world as one of the families who affirmed our trans child. So my wife comes out, and there's no way to hide that, right? So even if she wanted to just sort of quietly blend into the fabric of society, it wasn't going to happen. We either had to tell that story, or someone else was going to tell it for us, which some people actually tried to do. And so we came out again. And then when I came out, we came out again. And so it's been this sort of very authentic, look, I think, at a family that has gone through various changes. And I think what I want to showcase more than anything doing this, it's been uncomfortable. It's not always easy. Some days are really hard. But I think what I want to show to people is like, love is imperfect, but love is really strong. And so that's sort of our story. Our story is, yeah, we went through all these changes together, and we are in a better position now because of it. And I don't sugarcoat it. I talk about how hard it is. I talk about all the good things too. And then I talk about a whole bunch of stuff that isn't trans related. Talk about my mental health issues. I talk about like gardening and how terrible I am at it. I talk about all sorts of things. I make bagels and post it on Twitter, right? And I think like that shows the human side of being trans. Trans people can do anything. One of the things that we can do is bake bagels. Another thing we can do is raise kids. Another thing we can do is, write books. I mean, whatever it might be. So that's always sort of been my approach, is just put my whole self forward and hope that somebody finds a way to connect with me and with my story and with my family. Because if we do that, that's how we normalize our experiences.
Yeah, I thank you. And I think if your goal is to show that love is powerful, you've absolutely done that from my perspective, having followed you, because to show that your kids can transition, you can change how you identify. I don't know if you consider it a transition or not. And that your wife can transition, and that love can remain throughout all of that. I think that's a really powerful message to be able to send. And Amanda, what's your take on this question?
Well, I really resonate with a lot of what's been said already, that's for sure. Especially, I think, Amanda, what you were saying about you kind of, once you're out there already, then you don't have much choice about it. And this is kind of how I felt like my last year and a bit went. When I was a candidate running in 2019, I identified at the time just as non-binary, no intention to transition at all. And it was through conversations with Nicola, actually, because it wasn't a secret, but it also wasn't public, that I decided to own my own story and come out and claim it and share it. And then I realized after, a couple years later, when I wasn't done, I was going through my next gender crisis, and I was also going to have to come out as a trans guy and go through transition. I'm like, well, I'm here now, so let's make use of that, I suppose, and use it. I think there's probably three main reasons that I keep sharing. And now that I'm in this position, I've been sharing less because I'm so busy. I'm not managing to make it on social media without somebody to do it for me. But one really big piece of that is understanding, which a couple people mentioned. And I want people to appreciate the different individuals that we all are, and to see us as people, and to get a deeper just sense of what it means. And that leads into kind of like the normalization aspect as well, and not just the broader normalization, but the individual normalization, that this is something that people come up against. And there's two related pieces to that, and one I think especially important on the political front, both literally being in politics but also having a politicized identity. We unfortunately have to humanize ourselves. And so there's the aspect of normalization that is simply showing up and showing how human we are, which sometimes feels like, oh, really? Do we have to do this? But then I get it from the political angle as well, which I have to show that I'm a person, not some, policy robot that's going to make promises I'm never going to keep. And then the other piece is destigmatization, which is also around the mental health piece, but also the variety of different possible identities and choices for transition, or not choices in some cases, that people don't get to even make the choice, but that there is this broad range of us and people and all the struggles that need to be, I would say, unwoven from the systems and the structures underlying that make them seem unusual in some way. And that destigmatization of mental health, of the existence of trans people at all, I think both completely relate to our problematic structures, mostly in this case, probably on patriarchy, but some other ones as well. White supremacy and colonialism are never very far away, but that all of that kind of at the base and what is built upon that contributes to those issues. So all of that and the desire to break it apart piece by piece for collective liberation is my real incentive.
Thank you. And I think you're well on that path as well. I mean, as a trans person involved in politics, being able to see someone, of a similar background as far as being trans, being in a position of political leadership, that's, a first in the country of Canada, at least. And I think that's really valuable for people to be able to see themselves represented like that. So I'm going to move on to some more tailored questions to each of our panelists. And like I said before, I'm going to start with Jade, and I'm going to pose two questions. And that way, Jade, you'll be able to leave the meeting whenever it is that you have to go, because I know you have to head out early. So my first question to you is, music plays a huge role in many of our lives. And when I came out as trans, Laura Jane Grace of Against Me was a huge source of inspiration and empowerment for me. And knowing how much importance music has in people's lives, do you feel a sense of pressure or responsibility to behave in a certain way? And how do you navigate the music industry differently as a trans person of color or as a woman, as compared to a cis heterosexual white man?
One of the big things that I was very nervous about was I'm very involved in the metal and the hard rock community, which have a bunch of stereotypes around them of people thinking, big cis male figures, anti-queer events and things like that. And it's actually quite the opposite. And when I transitioned, I think they were the most open, and they use the name, my preferred name. They use my preferred pronouns, and were, I think, like overly accepting. And it blew me away into a fact that, yes, I actually started feeling pressure every time I would go to shows to dress extra femme, to, you know, if I wasn't in the mood to fully do my makeup, I'd even think about not going to a show or not going to an event because I was nervous about disappointing them, or not, you know, not being femme enough kind of thing. And the more and more I have struggled with it with my own mind and being out there in the community, the more I've realized that the community, the metal and the hard rock and the Vancouver community here really accept me for who I am, no matter how I dress. And I've been able to move past that now. And whereas I, you know, dress as I want to dress, and they'll still pronoun me and use Jade and support me and everything. And I can't thank them enough for it. And even in the recent like month, I've always had long hair ever since the beginning of my transition. And this is the first time where I've shaved a good portion of my hair. And I was always wanted to do this, but I thought it would take away from my identity or put me in a, you know, make me not feel as femme. But having the community stand behind me and me gave me the support to rock however I want to wear and however I want to look, and they'll still support me. And it's you know, it's so uplifting to have a large community like that support you and feel loved and accepted.
Thank you for that. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting situation where, you know, if a cis woman were to shave her head, those kinds of thoughts probably aren't going through their mind quite as much as it is for a trans person. And there's, you know, a lot to unpack around that. But I thank you for that perspective. And like, do you feel that there's do you carry with you a sense of responsibility for trying to portray trans people in, you know, a certain way when you're participating in music or in videos or whatever it is that you're doing, like it, or are you able to just kind of be yourself?
I actually feel it as an honor. I'm an ambassador, I almost feel like, because I'm out there meeting a bunch of these people, and a lot of them have never met a trans person in their entire life. And a lot of them, I can see it in their faces, they're not really sure how to deal with things when they first meet me. And I'm always open. If they, you know, misgender me, I'll, you know, say, hey, you know, this is kind of what's preferred. You know, I'll do my best to educate, not judge, be open with them, and have a positive experience, so that when they leave, they're like, oh, trans people are awesome. You know, I never want to leave a bitter taste in anyone's mouth after meeting me, as much as I can, unless they're a dick and a half and, you know, they can suck it. But, you know, if they're really, you know, there and they're working with me, or they're meeting me for the first time, well, a lot of times we've been corresponding over email, and then we do a video call, and they meet me in the first time, and you can see it visibly on their face. They weren't really knowing what to expect when they were just emailing back and forth shade. So I know I do my best to represent the trans community, and I hope to leave positive experiences. So to allow them better understanding, maybe to go educate themselves, or if they have any questions, to just ask me. If they, you know, I've had a lot of people months down the road after meeting me, after our first initial working together, whether we're doing a video, a photo shoot or something like that, months later, they'll message because we've gotten to know each other, and they'll ask me a bunch of questions like, hey, I don't mean to be weird, but I want to ask some questions, and I'll gladly answer, because they're opening up to me about their lack of education, and I try and do my best to answer what I can. I point in directions of a lot of different communities and other organizations that do a better job at explaining things, and try and give out resources where I can. So that's kind of my experience in the music community.
Thank you. I think that's going to be kind of a common theme throughout the night of there is sort of this responsibility that we have when we're visible to represent the community in a positive light, and to make people understand that we're just regular humans and that they should accept us. And it's not necessarily something that we should have to take on, but I'm very appreciative to all of you for taking on that role and for being the visible advocates that you are. So I'll move on to the second question here. And that is, much of your work centers around highlighting and uplifting people in BC as a visible person yourself, and someone who engages with other visible trans and non-binary people locally. Have you noticed some common themes when it comes to the experience of being trans and non-binary in this province? And if not, maybe you'd like to share some experiences of your own that you think are important for people to understand?
Absolutely. Ever since I've had the privilege of leading being an admin for the Trans Vancouver Facebook group, for working with Vancouver Pride, for doing work to support the scene and getting more out there, I've had a number of people come up to me and reach out to me, and we've talked and shared experiences and things like this. And the number one thing is the lack of medical understanding in BC, in Canada here, is for someone who wants to do some, to start to transition or to learn about it or to, get going on hormones, there's a surprising lack of resources available for them to find a doctor, for them to, connect with something that works a little bit better than just Transcare BC. I love Transcare BC to death. But I remember when I went for my transition and they put me on the year-long waiting list, I wanted something a little faster. So I started hunting for my own doctor. And that was a horrible road of meeting people and getting shut down, and getting hope and then not finding someone else and then them shutting me down. It's just, I don't know. When people approach me and ask me for resources, I really wish there was more I could give them. And that's that's kind of the theme I've seen. But I think through work like yourself and everyone on the panel, I think there's so much more hope and we can do with our community and coming together and working towards something stronger and better.
Thank you. I think that's a really important piece, is that healthcare aspect, and the fact that there's so many gatekeepers that are preventing us from being able to access the care that we need. So those are my two questions for you. I'm going to allow people to sort of chime in on questions as we go through this. I wanted to get yours not out of the way, but I wanted to allow you the time to address them before you had to go. So at this point, if anyone else on the panel has some input that they'd like to provide on either of the two questions that I asked Jade, this would be a time to chime in. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to Lara, but I'll just give you a second to chime in if there's anyone.
I'll chime in, and then I guess we can keep going if that's agreeable. If I'm next, can I chime in on Jade though?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So that was wonderful, and I'm so glad Jade had a chance to speak. But let me just begin by saying Jade and I are very, very different people. I feel no responsibility to represent the trans community in the way of being gregarious and open-hearted. I can't stand being misgendered. I think it's fucking ridiculous, and I don't accept it. I can't stand being dead named. And one of the things I've been doing, because people tell you, oh, you can't get your head around it and all this kind of stuff. You know, you can go to Wikipedia and you can look under the word trans, and it's pretty comprehensive, and it takes about 5 fucking minutes to read. So I don't buy any of this cis horse shit about how difficult any of this is. And one of the ways that I do it, if people constantly misgender me, is I ask them one question, and the answer is always the same. I say, you see how much this hurts me? And I just want to know, what have you done between the last time you did this and this time?
Oh, Laura, you've gone on mute again somehow.
I asked them, what have you done between our last meeting and this meeting to rectify this and correct it and not do it again? And the answer is always the same. They've done absolutely nothing, right? And when people say, oh, I've got to look into this, I've got to get my head around it, they never do, in my experience. And, you know, people can handle it however they like, but there's a wonderful book by Primo Levi called If Not Now, When? And that's what I say about all these kind of progressive issues. If not now, when? And this idea of it takes time and it's going to take, I'm done with it, especially right now with all the violence and crap that's going on in the world. The way that we live and the way that we lead and the way that we are is the way that's going to serve the world. And that includes the indigenous people and women and all the people with no voice. We're going to save the planet. And so the people in charge that have trouble getting their head around things, get them out of the way. I'm completely and utterly done and exhausted with people's excuses for why they do this and why they do that around trans people and trans issues. They're just ignorant and they can't be bothered finding things out for themselves. And so they'll continue to live and wallow in their ignorance, and they will never, ever, ever change. The end. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I think you both clearly have very different approaches, and I think they're both, you know, valid in their ways. Like personally, I've spent a lot of time trying to educate people, but at the same time, I get so frustrated by it because, you know, why can't they look up the Wikipedia definition and do their own research? So I think that's both of you have very valuable feedback here.
Once in a while, you come across somebody who's genuinely naive, you know, I mean, once in a while you do, and they're very agreeable and eager to learn, but most of the time it's just people that can't be bothered, you know, they really can't.
Mm-hmm. Would anyone else on the panel like to chime in as well here? Oh.
I would like to say just something about trans healthcare in BC.
Okay, great.
Because it's such something that's so varied everywhere. And I was just thinking about trans specific policy for obvious reasons today. But I know what people who we know wait for years in other places. Looking at you, Joey, to, you know, the sense that in BC I felt really privileged for it, but I think it still is excruciating and you know, not enough by a long shot. And there's no reason just because other people have a worse time that we shouldn't aim for better. But I always, whenever trans healthcare comes up, need to harp on the fact that I am really annoyed about my regular access to healthcare not being trans safe. So like, I just want to be able to go to the doctor, go to a pharmacy without having to worry that it's going to be awful and that I don't have to somehow make it through a trans safe doctor to figure that out. And the fact that for my trans safe, amazing nurse practitioner that I'm so grateful to have, that like he has to somehow maintain his own little network of contacts to make sure that his patients are okay. So just a basic level of trans education for all of our healthcare would be greatly appreciated.
Yes, it's the trans broken arm syndrome problem. All right, so Joey or Amanda, chime in if you'd like, but I'm going to otherwise move on to the question, the next question for Lara.
Yeah.
So, you were quite visible before socially transitioning. So can you give us a little bit of insight into what it's like to transition while you're in the public eye like that?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite something, you know. Now I had a little bit of a stutter step because I had been in a marriage for almost 19 years, and then we got divorced. And after we divorced, I came out because I ended up in a relationship with a guy who just happened also to be trans, but he was quite passing. So that really wasn't something that came out right away. But I had been presenting as male and then in a marriage with a woman. And so this was kind of a new thing that people were seeing. And so just for the purpose of convenience, I just kind of came out as queer or gay. And then it was probably about 2 years later that I finally had the courage to come out and transition. And I was very well accepted, like at work, you know, at the comedy festival and a lot of the things I did. But going up on stage for the first time was quite challenging. And I wasn't sure if I could continue, because even when I was doing bits right away about taking hormones and, you know, really getting into some of the things that I was struggling with and going through and presenting female and doing all these things, people would still come up after the show and say, is this real, or is this part of your skit? You know, and I thought, I can't handle this humiliation. And I remember the first time I came out and I thought it was pretty good, and people laughed at me. They didn't laugh with me. Not everybody, obviously, but some people were laughing. They thought it was funny. They thought it was like the old, you know, in a dress kind of a shtick. Like, you know, I was a deadpan stand up, you know, like why all of a sudden am I doing prop comedy or so on? And so that part was very, very hard on my dignity. And I wasn't sure if I could persevere. And early on, there was a lot of heckling and that kind of thing, just, you know, little chatter. And then I think one show that was quite revolutionary was I did a huge sold out show, part of this thing for the CNIB in Winnipeg, and there was about 1,500 people there. And it went really, really, really well. And people were so accepting and thought it was so funny. And towards the end of the show, somebody yelled something and I couldn't hear what it was. But, you know, just by the tone, I knew it was kind of like vulgar and transphobic. And an entire row of people turned around and went, shh, like that, very aggressively. And then the person tried to say something else, and the man stood up and just hovered over him and like gave him the stink eye. And that person, I could see that person like Fred Flintstone just like shrinking down in their seat. And I thought, okay, you know, there's people that really are standing up for me here. And that was it. And then I just got much more comfortable being on stage. And that hasn't happened in ages. You know, I mean, sometimes the people don't like the material, but, you know, then, you know, they're just taking me for who I am as a person. And so that was really, really, really exciting for me to experience that the first time. And now I'm quite comfortable on stage. And people say that my material is different and they enjoy it more. You know, that it's gentler. That might be a little surprising given my tone tonight, but it's gentler than it was before, apparently.
Well, I remember listening to you on the Debaters, and you did some form of comedy around your transition, and I remember thinking it was amazing. So I don't know if that was around the time that you were getting sort of negative feedback from it, but personally, as a trans person, that meant a lot to me, and I thought it was that you were fantastic on every episode of the Debaters that I've ever listened to.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Would anyone from the panel like to chime in on this question? I know that you probably there aren't too many of us here that transitioned in the public eye or in a super public way. So,
you know, something that happened, Nicola, very early on was somebody, and it was one of the most distressing things to this day that I've ever experienced, which was somebody went in and hacked my Wikipedia page and just did paragraph after paragraph of the most violent and vitriolic transphobic stuff.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was so shocking. And then, and I didn't know right away. And then actually one of the editors of Wikipedia got hold of me and told me. And then he basically blocked the page so nobody could see it. And then they made it go so that nobody could ever edit it ever
I
again.
said justice.
So
We'll get that one taken care of.
yeah. So yeah, that was quite violent. You know, I really did find that quite distressing, that somebody would just go in and mock, you know, somebody, probably a stranger. You know, they probably didn't even know me, you know, maybe they did, I don't know, but it was just, yeah.
Yeah,
It
it's
just-
horrible that there's people out there that do that. I mean, I don't understand what goes through people's minds when they think that, you know, attacking someone in that way makes sense somehow. So I'm very sorry that you had to go through all of that.
Can I jump in for a sec?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so like growing up in the digital age and then seeing technology go crazy, and then the whole TikTok phenomenon that's coming out. When TikTok started, I started streaming on TikTok. And when you're streaming on TikTok, you basically have everyone in the world is just scrolling, and then it'll pop up on their feed as you're doing your live, and they can choose to keep scrolling or they can watch. That's kind of how TikTok works with the live stuff. And when I'd be drumming to a pop song, and I quickly noticed, you know, just as it is, you get a lot of hate, a lot of anti-trans people, a lot of hate on my weight, on my looks, or is that a man, or go eat a cheeseburger. And it was one of the things that I knew is that, you know, just pushing past those allowed me to have a bigger fan base of people that support. And then before I knew it, people in the comments were also being like, hey, you know, shut up or get out of here, on my defense, as I was doing my stuff without me having to chime in or do anything. And that was such a rewarding feeling. But it is hard when you're trying to do something and you're getting heckled and you're getting, and then with the digital age and with all this stuff, it's easier for people to do it on behind the screen. As you know, people can just make comments and berate you without having any responsibility behind it, and it's hard and it's difficult to deal with, for sure.
Yes, definitely difficult to deal with. And I unfortunately think that we're all probably in that boat when it comes to having to deal with online hate. And hopefully we're all at a point where our support networks are big enough that they kind of drown out that hate. So moving on to Joey, you have come onto my radar fairly recently through TikTok, as it happens. And you create these very funny and heartwarming videos, in my opinion. Do you find that the popularity of TikTok has changed trans and non-binary advocacy? And do you view TikTok's popularity as being generally good for LGBTQIA2S+ representation?
This one's definitely interesting because funny thing is that I didn't actually mean to kind of blow up on TikTok. I'm meant to be a YouTuber. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make these also like funny videos, because I do comedy, but also kind of educational ones. And I thought, oh, I'll sign up for TikTok just to promote myself. And then that blew up. And it is amazing how the format that it can use, you can make small funny videos quite easily, and there are great ways that you can play around with it. Like I always start off with, hi, I'm Cuppa Joey, your favorite kind of trans fat. Already somebody's got a transgender pun there. They're hooked, and it's a lot of fun. But of course, there are a lot of problems with TikTok as well. For example, I noticed that my following is mostly younger than me, which is fine. I do try and keep sort of friendly to younger people as much as possible, especially as I know that I didn't have that representation when I was younger, and I want them to see representation that I wish I could have. But at the same time, when you think, oh, I'm glad that I got out of this terrible gatekeeping phase that I had back then, you're then seeing them come up again, and you're there thinking, oh no, you're going to grow out of this, but I have to now deal with the brunt of this until you've grown out of it, which yeah, can be definitely a bit tricky. And of course, like many algorithms, one of the problems with TikTok is that if I talk about myself as a trans man and I don't censor it, I will get a community guidelines violation, because just using the word transgender is insulting, even though I'm just talking about who I am as a person. And it can be very frustrating. I have seen very popular accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers be silenced because they said, I called myself a trans lesbian and now I'm banned for 2 weeks. And that is where I feel that this new digital platform really is failing. And a lot of what has been said here really did resonate with me. For example, what Amata said about having to humanize ourselves. Like, that's one of the good things about TikTok, is that it's for everyone. So everyone could just go up, whether it's like a very well edited via, you know, a future film director video, or whether it's just somebody holding their camera saying, I'm going to complain because it's been a rough day and you're all going to have to hear it. Everyone has the chance to have that voice, which is why we are seeing more people. But at the same time, it could be dehumanizing to have to humanize yourself, because I should just be a person, you know. I should just be able to come in and be like, hi, I'm a human being, without having to prove that. And it's a bit of a vicious circle, in that if I have to prove that I'm human, it feels like I'm showing that I'm not, which is painful, to be completely honest. It is painful. And again, like as Jade said in the TikTok live streams, I will get so many comments. One of my favorite ones, because of course we all have our favorite hate, right? We get our favorite ones. And I remember there was this guy begging to join in as a guest, and I knew that it was going to be a troll because he had a picture of Jeremy Clarkson, which, if you don't know who he is, you're lucky. And he was saying, oh, I swear I'm not going to say anything fat phobic. I'm not going to say anything transphobic. And I'm like, the answer's still no, go away. And he just kept saying over and over again, I won't be transphobic. I won't be fat phobic. I won't be transphobic. I won't be fat phobic. I said, it's still no. And then he left with four-eyed freak, and that made my day. I just thought, of all things to go for, the fact that I wear glasses was what they left with. And I thought, I wish I could get more hate than that, than, you know, against my human rights. It can be ridiculous, but there are moments like that which do bring me such joy. And then despite wading through all the crap like that and all the invasive comments and questions and things that I really don't want to have to deal with, for example, again, like Lara said, with people not wanting to educate themselves, I will get the bad faith questions a lot. Like, one of the ones that will pop up a lot is, does this mean you used to be female? And I do not like that, because I don't want to then have to call myself the wrong gender, which is what they're trying to get me to do. So I always just say, I'm transgender and I'm a man, and leave it at that. And it is amazing how they go from confused to, oh, I get it now, even though I've not changed what I have said at all. And so despite all these awful things coming up, there will be one person that says, I've never seen a fat transgender man, and now that I see you, I think there's hope for me. And that's what makes it all worth it. Despite the terrible algorithm, despite the trolls getting through, despite everything, just knowing that this platform is meaning that people are seeing themselves and just seeing the average everyday, and not the Hollywoods, the Elliot Pages. They're seeing the Kappa Joeys as well. It's doing a lot of good. And yeah, I think that despite the crap, I'm hoping that this platform is going to do a lot of good for trans people in the future. I really do hope so.
Thank you. I mean, I'm someone who uses TikTok quite frequently, and I get into that pattern of scrolling, but I always get this immense sense of joy anytime one of your videos pops up, and I'm like, yes, that representation is so good. So I'm not going to ask for panelists to provide input every single time, but I'm going to maybe give a little bit of time between each question for people to just jump in. So if any of you panelists want to jump in and say something between these questions, feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to just kind of move along, and you can provide your input whenever you feel necessary.
I was just going to say that I have my favorite hate as well. So I recently got a Cricut, and for people who don't know what that is it's like a crafting machine. So you can like design your own stuff to put on mugs or t-shirts or what have you. I promised my wife that I would put it to good use. And I take my favorite insults and I put them on things. This one's probably too rude to read, so I won't read it, but I always get the really creative ones, right? Like I have one that just says pronouns in bio, because for some reason that is just something that people say to me. I'll come up with this big argument that deconstructs why these laws against trans kids are, a bad idea, or why people should disallow trans kids from transitioning. And I'll go into all of the facts. And after 20 tweets of this with all this science to back it up, someone will go, LOL, you have pronouns in your bio, right? So it's like, so I just make mugs out of the words of my enemies, as I call it, and t-shirts. I was called Canada's patient zero in the gender apocalypse the other day, which is like my favorite. Like, what a compliment. So like that is a t-shirt now, and I post them, and I think like this kind of shows people that you can turn things around, and you don't have to take them seriously. You don't have to, you can just have fun with it too. And I never hear from these people again, which is so weird. So anyway, that's what I've decided to start doing, and I enjoy it.
I love that, and I think I might have to adopt that as well. I have some interesting hate comments every once in a while, and instead of retweeting them, maybe they just need to sit on a mug or a shirt. And this actually this works out well, because my next question is for you. So it seems like you're used to speaking at some high profile events. Maybe I'm wrong here, but that's kind of the sense that I get. And you seem to have an incredibly busy schedule. Prior to this, we'd followed each other on Twitter and Facebook, but we'd never really communicated directly. So I'll admit I was somewhat surprised that you were so ready to say yes to joining this panel discussion. And I'm assuming that that's because you place a certain amount of importance on speaking about trans and non-binary issues and supporting trans non-binary advocacy, more so than you place on making money and gaining exposure. But maybe you can expand on why you felt that it was important to participate in this discussion today.
Yeah, absolutely. It is far more important to me to be here than it is to, do a lot of other things. And, I think that they serve different purposes. Like I owe a lot to this community, and I'm not just talking things like, career or anything along those lines. What I owe to this community is when my child came out and I didn't know what to do, it was the trans community that brought us in and supported us and taught us how to support our child. Up until then, other than knowing that something wasn't quite, right in my identity as a cis woman, my only real exposure to trans issues was through the media. We talked about that already, and the horrific portrayals of trans people. And it was a talk show, my only exposure to trans kids. And it was, I can't remember who the child was now, but it was one of the very few who was out at the time. And it was horrible. There were, people were really mean to this child. They were mean to the parents, and I didn't know what all of this meant. So when our child came out, I got on the phone. I literally called every resource I could find. And I got 2 or 3 trans people on the phone that day who are very busy, and I know who they are today, and I've worked with them since. And the fact that they actually took the time to talk to the scared parent who didn't know what was going on, meant the world to me. This community has been there for my family through everything. And so, yeah, this is the most important work that I do. I try to work with the cis community to do a lot of the educating. I try to work with parents and help them along in that journey. I try to work with partners because I know what that feels like as well. And but ultimately my heart is with this community, and so it isn't any time that I can do this, I will. I have to feed my family, so I do that, and that's why I write, and that's why I speak, and I used to feel bad about that, but honestly, like, we should all be compensated for our time when we teach. We should all be compensated for our time when we create, and so I do that now. And then I turn around and I do as much as I can for the community. And I try to bring people into talks. I try to create panels. I try to do a lot of that as well, and lift up voices who maybe haven't had the opportunities that I've had, particularly, people at the intersectionality of, say, being trans or non-binary and racialized, or trans and non-binary and disabled, or whatever else there may be, or they may not have those opportunities. So let's introduce them to people. Let's get them out. Let's help people learn how to do better by all of us. So it's a work of passion. I get up every day. I'm like, I love my job. I started my job at 7:30 this morning, and this will be taking me until midnight. I have no regrets. I love every minute of it, except the hate that isn't very creative and I can't turn into mugs.
I think that's a really neat perspective to have, and it's kind of difficult sometimes to strike that balance between being able to make a living and pay your bills, and there's an affordability crisis, so that's not easy sometimes, and then also being able to do that passion work and the advocacy that you care about. And I have a job as a social justice ambassador, so I kind of get to blend both, but most people don't have that privilege. You have to pick what you're going to spend your time on, and a lot of times it's being able to put food in your mouth. So I really appreciate that perspective, and I really appreciate you joining us tonight as well. I'm going to move on to a question for Amita now, which is, last November, you became the first non-binary person, the first person of East Asian descent, and the first astrophysicist to lead a federal party in Canada. You've been vocal about transphobia among Green Party members, and I've personally had experience with that as well. What was the feedback that you received from your party and the general population when you took on this role as the leader of the Green Party of Canada? And do you feel that the Green Party is becoming a more inclusive and accepting environment?
Oh, big question. The short answer is yes, it is. And I will be the first to be honest that there have been really difficult times with Green Party members, but also that I do not experience that broadly. So I feel like during leadership races in 2020 was when I probably experienced the most transphobia. And it doesn't surprise me that in times of, internal party structured fighting, which is what leadership and nomination contests are, that, the small group of loud, angry people who have a real problem with you show up, because that tends to be how it is. And my experience with the membership of the party generally is pleasant. In fact, it's quite beautiful. I'm having a great time with the majority of the party, which really makes me also want to get the people who are in governance to really get on dealing with the few people. And I think that in that case, it's a lot of cluelessness, but coming into this role I've been very well accepted. I think there is a certain amount of cluelessness as well in terms of things like microaggressions, general not understanding. But it's also there with a lot of love. So it's kind of easier when somebody's willing to learn, that to give them the hints in the right direction. But there are some lingering struggles with some people who just don't get it, and they just don't see it. And it's a bit rough, but I think also my experience has probably been positive because they know they need me. So it's I don't think they really have the opportunity to treat me too poorly at this moment. I don't think it would go very well for them. Not that I'm holding them under threat or anything like that, but we do need to rebuild, and there has to be the sense of regrouping. But I'm not surprised to find that the majority of the membership was actually lovely, because it just is in line with what we actually do believe in, and we should have mechanisms to not let the few angry people who'd like to drag us in a different direction actually get the airspace. In terms of the broader space, politically and publicly, it's been interesting, I think, partially because I feel like I get less hate now. I don't think that's actually true. I think that's because I'm not paying attention. But there have been definitely like more disgusting comments on some of my Instagram posts and stuff. Being more visible means that people do show up in a sort of different way. But I think that there's both things. I've received a welcome that I wasn't expecting, and part of that I think is the position. A position of leadership like this demands respect sometimes. And so I've gotten a welcome from certain conservative politicians that I really wasn't expecting. I'm like, I think you probably feel like you have to. And so it's it is a sense though that there's a really important representative piece, because you are forcing the issue of making people treat you normally, because they do not have the space to do otherwise, because they have to work with you, and to show disrespect means something far worse. Not that that would last in politics everywhere, just to be clear. But then the opposite is also true. Being in leadership and being on a pedestal, people think they have the right to tear you down because of people's natural responses to hierarchies. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. And here I am feeling like a human. Thank you, Joey, for saying that making yourself human all the time it makes you feel less human sometimes. I just was delighted that you shared that, because it's so true. I'm like feeling less human all the time every time that I have to do this. But I do feel like this is a moment where I'm very aware at all times, in dealing with inside party stuff and outside party stuff, of my privileges and my intersectional marginalization at the same time. So speaking of privileges, talking about publicly transitioning, that is absolutely what I'm doing right now. I feel like I think the metaphor that I used is I cut open my cocoon, because I'm 2 weeks away from my top surgery anniversary and a month and a half away from my T anniversary. And I feel very grateful and privileged to not have to deal with trans misogyny, and to have my biggest transition struggles be acne and voice cracking, which I'm enjoying the voice cracking, the acne less so. You're going up for a press conference, you're like, really? You're like, okay. But on the other side, at the same time, not really, I don't have to deal with colorism, but I certainly have to deal with racism. And I also have to deal with ableism, to do with having mental health and actually chronic illness at the moment, which is something that is also gender related, I guess. So it kind of makes it worse for my dysphoria if I ever have to deal with it. So those things at the same time and are definitely weights. So having both of those at the same time, it often feels like everything has to go in one direction, and there isn't room for the complexity, both of all of the different pieces. And it's nearly impossible to communicate that well and talk about, all of the things you're supposed to talk about from policy. But overall, the people in the party have been very understanding. And I think the public is just like, have you actually gone off the deep end as a party? Because there's no way this can be real.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much. There's so much to unpack in everything that you said, but I think one of the things that really stands out to me as someone who is sort of a provincial Green supporter and sort of on and off federal Green supporter, it's nice to know that it's a case of, you know, a few bad apples spoil the barrel, as opposed to a case of the barrel being full of bad apples to begin with. And you know, I wish you luck in being able to sort of weed them out, because I think it's helpful, at least for me, to know that the majority of the party is accepting if I'm potentially going to be getting back involved. And I think that would be the same for any other trans people that might be interested in supporting the Green Party as well. I don't know if this is a question that anyone else from the panel is going to be able to touch on, because you're the only one in a Green Party leadership position. But
I would add something related-ish about this, because I was just speaking with the Young Greens from the UK, from the Green Party of England and Wales, because they've had a massive time fighting a rise of transphobia in their party. And so I think that I would just add the warning to this of, you know, knowing that anti-trans hate is on the rise, we need to shore up our defenses. And this isn't just go for the Green Party, this goes for every political party, every organization ready for this, and, you know, building the bridges anytime we can, to make sure that we can get through it. And I mean, I would count us perhaps lucky now that we actually have a political party that just has an anti-trans agenda, because at least like you just go over there or something. But that, yeah, highly aware of that and wanting to share any sort of sense of solidarity for anybody organizing when you deal with that sort of possibility of having people to come in to try to use your organization or your movement or your political party to actually do something about an anti-trans agenda.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge piece, is for any party to make sure that you've got protections in place, and that you're not going to let that sort of rise of anti-trans sentiment take hold of the party. So I really appreciate that comment. Laura, I have a question for you now.
Yeah. And can I just touch on the politics a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. Go for it.
Because it plays into this idea of, you know, changing minds one person at a time. And if people could just meet us and hear our stories, we hear this over and over again. And I did a show recently for who became the new progressive conservative leader in our country, Candice Bergen. And after the show, we had a very warm chat. This was before she became the conservative leader, when she was just, you know, a Manitoba MP. And she was extremely complimentary and gendered me properly. And we had a very pleasant chat. And in no way did I feel that she was uncomfortable around me or any of these things. And so on a very personal level, I did not feel that kind of transphobia. And so a lot of this is actually cynical. It's driven by their religious-minded base. And it's why I feel that sometimes we really have to focus on it in a legislative way and just get these bigots out of office and stop really concerning ourselves with, because Candice Bergen is intelligent and she knows what trans people are, and she knows what trans people, that we exist and that we've existed for a long time. And she seemed to be perfectly comfortable around trans people. But when she's up on her platform and she's trying to get votes and she's trying to become the prime minister, God forbid, she's a completely different person. And so this idea of like being treated well and respected and all these kind of things, I mean, I think we're at war now. And the only way we're going to win that war is through legislation, through electing trans people, getting them seats in power, and having us there at these tables when these decisions are made, and having votes and being able to roll back some of this vicious legislation.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's really important that politicians aren't pandering to a base of bigots, because that's not going to end well for any of us.
And the other one, I think, and this is this is just a note. This is really a note to myself. I'm not telling people what to do, but the idea of us getting so upset about legislation which in the very early stages of being tabled, even in the United States, which doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of ever, being approved or standing up in any kind of court or even the Supreme Court, and even the new highly conservative, ultra conservative Supreme Court have been pretty measured in dealing with some of these egregious non-constitutional types of attempts that are done in these kind of states. They're attention grabbing. I mean, look at the bathroom bills and all the times we spent screaming and yelling. And I know it's very distressing and scary, but not a single person, as far as I can tell, was ever arrested for being in a bathroom. I know people were terrorized, mostly cis women. But there was so much discussion and hand-wringing around this legislation, which really didn't hold much water. And these things are very scary. But they're trial balloons that these conservatives often float about the type of horrible dystopian world that they would like to see created that really is not ever going to come to fruition. And so I think sometimes we exhaust ourselves being concerned about things and not focus on things that are really important, like actual laws and legislation and so on at a much higher level.
Yeah,
that's my 2 cents.
Thank you for that input. And to sort of make a bit of a leap from politics to comedy, I want to ask a question about that. And the question is whether or not it's possible to make jokes without offending people, because that's kind of a trending topic in the world today, and one that's been sort of amplified by this whole Will Smith, Chris Rock scandal. So as trans people, we've often been the butt of the joke. You've talked about this before tonight. So how do you approach comedy in a way that uplifts people as opposed to tearing them down?
Well, comedy is always going to be directed at something or someone. So, I mean, one of the things, I try to do as a comic is stay in my lane, direct the comedy and the comments back at myself. Sometimes it's to be educated and really look at, I mean, I've heard many trans bits that are really just utterly fantastic, really, really on side and amazing. And then there's obviously other stuff, like, the most egregious being Dave Chappelle. And, in the case of Chappelle, when people say that Dave Chappelle is not, and I've met Dave Chappelle and, I've seen him perform live many times. And I mean, at a fundamental base level, like Candice Bergen, he's like, going to be very pleasant and nice to trans people. And if Dave Chappelle had a voice and was to vote for something that would prevent trans people from doing this or that, he would be on the trans side of it. But at the same time, he says these horrible, stupid, ignorant things in his shows. And it's not him so much I worry about, it's the audience, right? And the problem with Dave Chappelle and comics like that kind of do that preachy kind of political thing is always in comedy. When you're writing bits, you have to do things that are shorthand, right? And so one of the most horrifying things that Dave Chappelle says in The Closer is he says, men, women, 2 genders, fact or something. And then he talks about J.K. Rowling, and then he says, they say she's a TERF. And clearly he hasn't understood or never had heard TERF before he really started writing the show. And then he goes, Team TERF, and he holds up his thumb. And, and I know as a comic, and someone that's been doing this for 40 years, Team TERF is alliterative. It sounds good, and it's kind of funny sounding. And when he says it, he is not containing within himself what TERF means or does to us, right? It means nothing to him, right? He's not thinking trans, exclusionary, radical feminists. He's not thinking of the vitriol that these crazy people have been throwing at us for years. He's just thinking of Team and TERF and it being funny And that's all he's going for. And his audience is what scares me, you know. And the most horrifying and alone I ever felt in my life as someone growing up loving comedy, knowing she was trans, was around 1983 or whenever it was, when that Eddie Murphy special Raw came out, that so many comics that I know to this day that I admire will say, that's the special that got me into comedy. And when I saw that, that was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. And they will say that out loud in 2022. And then I'm forced in a hotel room when everybody's having a good time to say, what was it about the 15 minutes of horrifying, vitriolic fucking homophobia, right, that started that special off that you loved so fucking much, right? And then they'll say, oh yeah, that part, not so much. And I'll say, that part is what you loved. And that's what everybody loved, because I was back there at that time, you know? And we've moved from that to some degree, but that audience will follow. And that's why we have such a responsibility as comedians, and especially intelligent comedians, you know, who are trying to say something, like Dave Chappelle, trying to say something, to have a really sincere responsibility to get our facts right and to do our very best to be inclusive and not throw other human beings under the bus for the sake of a chintzy little joke, right? Which is not to say that anybody should then go up on stage and slap you and then scream in a terrifying manner, like we saw at the Oscars. But at the same time, I've been attacked on stage. And at the same time, I've kind of felt like attacking somebody on stage because of the horrifying shit. You know, I've sat in audiences as a trans woman and seen comics I like and admire just come out with the most really nauseating material. And I'm just so profoundly disappointed. And at some point during that bit, at least 2 or 3 people in the audience will turn and they'll look at me, right? And then now there's a spotlight shining on me. And I don't mean like on a TV show when it's like, cut to the black person, you know, to make sure they're laughing, you know, not that kind of thing. This is, you know, they're looking at me and saying, there's one of them here, right? And, you know, all of a sudden, I was a member of a wonderful group, you know, and now I'm not. And that's another thing, Nicola, that's happened with comedy that I think is just as important to these current trends than just various strains of identity politics, is really about the general change in diversity, you know, in our communities across the board. There's a comedian from the United States called Larry the Cable Guy, you know, and he traffics in a kind of blue collar, kind of lowbrow humor. You know, it's not all terrible and people love it. But I remember I did Just for Laughs one year, and he happened to be, we were all having breakfast, and he was very upset because his gala didn't go very well. I mean, it went fine. I mean, I thought he did quite well. It was quite funny, but it didn't go as well as it did in the United States. And I remember saying to him that so much of his act is around this idea of common sense, right? And here's how I would fix the problem. And don't you all agree, right? And you have a whole audience of people saying, right? And that's what these comics experience for most of their careers. And now all of a sudden you get to an audience and people go, no, I don't think that that's what we should do. I don't think that's common sense, right? And people have different ideas and different viewpoints. And so for the first time, the dominant ideas and viewpoints of the comedian and the dominant ideas and viewpoints of the audience don't always reconcile. And that creates a certain amount of conflict. And that's what we're seeing as a general overall trend that happened maybe about 10, 15 years ago. And smart comics have caught up and they've got up to speed. You know, I did a show once where 7 people killed, including like 2 trans people on the show. And then a white comic got up with very hacky old school material, told 3 jokes, they bombed. And then the rest of his set was about, you can't tell jokes anymore. And then someone in the audience yelled out, "We were laughing till you came on," you know? And I think that's important to kind of realize that that's a little bit of what is happening. Now that may stratify it. And so we see these breakaways. So we see, oh, it's queer comedy night, it's trans comedy night. And that kind of stratification, I don't think is terribly healthy. But at the same time, I think it's transitional. And I think at some point we'll all come together again, and we'll find a way to kind of do this in a more gentler and calmer way. I really think we're in a transitional period right now, and people are really kind of a bit confused and scattered by how much of an acceleration of social trends are taking place at the same time. You know, it's a very stressful time.
So thank you very much for that perspective. I think a lot of that comes back to that question around responsibility that I posed to Jade, and recognizing that comedians have a responsibility not to be ignorant on stage, not necessarily because being ignorant is necessarily that big of a deal, but because you're then pushing that ignorance onto your audience, and you're changing the way that people view, in this instance, trans folks.
Yeah, I mean, you literally have a microphone. You have to remember that you literally have a microphone. And when you have a microphone, people think you know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So moving on now to a question for Joey. And this also ties into sort of that hate component. So you regularly respond to hate comments that you receive online, and you choose to do so in a way that is often humorous. And that's kind of an approach that I will sometimes take as well. But I think we all have different motivations for doing that. So for you, is that, you know, a coping mechanism? Is it a way of educating the public? Is it a strategy for increasing views? Is it all of the above? Is it something else entirely? Kind of what is your motivation for responding to hate in the way that you do?
Yeah, so kind of an all of the above sort of situation. I did want to pick up on a point that Lara made as well, because I felt that she really summed up a lot of the points that I felt were being disappointed by comedians, because, you know, I did my first stand-up gig when I was 14, before I even knew what trans was. So I've always loved comedy. And ironically, one of the people that got me into comedy was Graham Linehan. And you can imagine that I was just a tad let down, just a tad, considering he is now king of the turfs. And so, yeah, that was a little bit of an anime villain plot twist. And then J.K. Rowling, and it's like, all the childhood heroes are here. You know?
Well, funnily enough, Graham actually started a petition asking J.K. Rowling to sue me. So,
oh, brilliant! Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, if only I could get them together, we'd have a cup of tea and a right natter. But yeah, and the thing is that with comedy, you're either punching up or you're self-deprecating, and I tend to do a bit of the two. It's so easy to make transgender jokes that don't harm anyone. You know, that's pretty much my whole set, you know, in that, like, for example, there are so many funny situations that come about with being trans, whether it's, hey, you better watch out that it's Transgender Day of Visibility, even though you're a trans parent. There are the puns like that, which are beautiful. But also, I am somebody who, before J.K. Rowling's huge reveal as to how she felt about us, I went to Harry Potter Studios with certain items in my backpack to do with me being trans, because I was going to a hotel with my partner later and turning up into Harry Potter Studios with all this weird trans stuff. It's just one of the peak moments. But when it comes to responding to the hate comments with humor, yes, it is partially coping, because if you can laugh at them, then it just feels so much better. You're taking the power back, because at first they're trying to laugh at you and take away your dignity, and then you're going, I'm not the ridiculous one in this situation, it's you. And this is why, and I often think about Mel Brooks and the producers, and what he said, that if you look at, say, in response to media fiction about Nazis, that if you look at like American History X and things like that, that yes, while they are definitely the bad guys, it still glamorizes it, it still makes them look cool. Whereas if you say these people are ridiculous, they're worthy of mocking, then it takes away all of their power from them. You are no longer putting them on the same level as you. You're no longer saying, okay, your opinion is worthy of debate. Because no, anybody that tells me that I'm actually a biological woman is talking crap. And I'm going to tell them that they're talking crap. I'm going to show them that they're talking crap. And I'm going to laugh. Because if I start going, oh no, actually, I have been taking testosterone for this long and I don't actually know what my chromosomes are, then I'm giving credence to their arguments. Whereas if I say, no, that's silly, and this is why it's silly, then it encourages people to laugh at the idea of transphobia. Like, this is such a ridiculous viewpoint. It's worthy of mockery. And sometimes you just get given gifts like that guy that told me that I was a four-eyed freak. It's just like, oh, thank you. Like some of them, I just see them and I think, thank you. You have given me so much material here, and especially with like Amanda and their mugs that they print things on, there's so much joy, and it can be very cathartic as well, because you do feel that sense of I am above these people. Because yes, as I said before, when you have to humanize yourself, it is ironically dehumanizing. To then take back that power and go, no, you're the one that's below me because you're a bigot. I'm not like that. I'm better than you because I don't hate people for trivial reasons, you know. And that is, so it's cathartic. It puts them on this, under the ridiculous spotlight that they're trying to put us under. And again, it lets other trans people know, you know what, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point that you're making around how ridiculous transphobia is. It's sort of like a gold mine of comedy in some ways, not all of the time, but some of the time. And so I really appreciate how you do make light of that. I think that's a really good explanation. My next question here is for Amanda. You came out as non-binary fairly recently, and I saw comments from people supporting you for living your life authentically, all the way to other people that were claiming that you're attention seeking. And I know that social media has impacted your mental health quite severely. You've talked about this on Twitter. So what was it like for you to come out in such a public way and to face both the good and the bad responses? And what motivates you to continue sharing your life with the world? And what do you do differently now to protect your mental health? I know that's kind of a lot of questions all in one there.
I'll try and answer all this as quickly as possible. You would think that after having two family members come out as trans and non-binary, that it wouldn't be a big deal. But especially after my wife Zoe came out, cheers to my wife Zoe, by the way, who snuck me another tea while I was like, please come bring me another tea, my throat is so dry. And like she like snuck it into the cloffice for me, so thank you. But after you think after that it would not be that big of a deal. But I really felt like, at this point, we were now known on an international level as a family with multiple trans people in it. And there was a big responsibility. I feel that there was a big responsibility for us to, to represent the community. And I figured out that I was non-binary a good while before I said anything. I was really scared to come out. I really didn't want to, turn our family and therefore the community into some kind of mockery, right? Because I knew what would happen. I knew there would be people that would be like, oh wow, 3 people, it's contagious, or like just proof of a cult that you all get sucked into this identity, ideology, and of course the oh, just trying to stay relevant, Amanda, right? I mean, all of those things. I everything negative that anyone has said to me, I had already thought of, it had already run through my head. I had already agonized over. What I realized, and the reason why I came out, is because my entire job, all of my work, is centered around helping people live authentically. And how on earth can I do that authentically if I myself am not living authentically? That's hypocritical. I can't do that, because now I have realized this thing about myself and I have to put that forward. So I did it. But for those who don't know, I had a pretty significant mental health breakdown in 2020, and it was a very visible one because it mostly happened on Twitter as a result of some things that happened on Twitter, coupled with my own trauma disorder that was undiagnosed at the time. Very quickly got diagnosed after that. And I left Twitter for a few months, and I scaled back my social media presence quite a bit. When I went back to social media and back to Twitter, I decided to do things very differently. And one of the ways that I decided I needed to do things differently was a lot of internal work on my own value. So one of the things that I do now is I have a very strong belief that my value is 100% innate. That means that I, as a human being, have value, period. We all have value as human beings. And I think sometimes when you have felt like you weren't good enough, which was a lot of my story for a long time, dealing with various types of abuse and various types of bullying and harassment throughout my life, I always felt like I had to seek that external validation. And that's why it hurt so much when a large group of people turned on me in 2020 and didn't just criticize me, but like really tore me down as a person. And I almost lost my life for that. So I definitely thought, if I'm going to do this, I have to be stronger. So now I know that I am enough just as myself, and I am worthy just as myself. And so I show up every day, and those comments don't hurt me anymore. They really don't. They really don't, because somebody else's opinion of me is theirs to own. They can do what they want with that. That's not my story. I don't have to take that on. I'm open to criticism. I'm open to feedback. I'm open to constructive criticism. I'm open to feedback. I'm not open to hate and harassment and assumptions and lies and character assassination and anything else that you want to throw at me. Bigotry, that is yours. You keep that over there. And what I do is I compare it to if I'm sitting at a table in a restaurant and a server comes up and hands me a meal, and that meal is not mine. That's not what I ordered. I'm gonna tell the server, I'm sorry, that's not the right meal. I'm gonna hand that back to the server. And that's what I do with all of the negative comments and everything else that comes my way. I didn't order that. I didn't ask for that. You can take that back, take that somewhere else. So that is how I stay saner and more together in what can be a fairly toxic environment of social media. It's all about creating community, and I try to leave it a lot of positivity and a lot of authenticity, and I hope that comes through. And there you go.
And thank you for that. I mean, you have a much larger following than I do, but from when I was getting all of the hate around J.K. Rowling threatening to sue me, that was kind of one of those moments where I had to go, okay, well, how do I deal with this? Like, it's nothing you ever experience in real life, that quantity of hate, and it can really be damaging for your mental health. So learning how to love yourself and just be comfortable in presenting your authentic self online is a skill that takes a lot of practice and a lot of self-reflection. So I'm glad to hear that you're in a place where you're feeling more confident and you're able to sort of brush all of that off, because I know from personal experience that that's extremely difficult to deal with. So I have one last question here for Amida, and then I wanted to open it up for some questions from the audience. I don't know how much time we'll have to do that because we did end up at some point in time shifting from being ahead of schedule to being slightly behind schedule, but we're still on track to finish by 9. I would just, if everyone's comfortable answering, a question or two from the audience, if folks want to leave questions in the chat, I'll take a look at that after I ask Amita their question, and we'll see how many we can get to before before our guests run out of energy. So the question I have for you, Amita, is I would like to believe that no one gets involved in politics to maintain the status quo. It seems like that might not be true, but that's what I like to believe. And I know that that's definitely true for you. So what are some big changes that you would like to see in BC and in Canada related to trans and non-binary people? I know you sort of touched on the healthcare aspect before, but what are some changes that you'd like to see?
I'm going to avoid doing the policy laundry list, which is always very tempting whenever anyone asks me a question like this, but instead go a little broader, which in a way makes me slightly sad because I think my main ask would be equal human rights. And it's depressing to me that seems like a big thing to ask for. And then it seems from a realism aspect that it's not, because most people actually don't have that and we just pretend that you do. And it's actually really up to the individual to try to fight a justice system for any scrap of rights. And so there's that. But I think there are also small things. Healthcare is one of them, both trans-specific and general, safe, accessible healthcare, mental health care. But also, I think when it comes to kind of intersectionality of issues, some of the biggest things that I want for my trans siblings are food. Access to basic needs is a really big deal. Food, water, shelter, not dying at our own hands or those of others. I said big, but these are big, and I wish they weren't big, but those are it. And there's a whole lot of structural changes that go under that. And I mentioned it earlier, but I think really what I want is full transformation. And I think I still hope that people aren't getting into politics for the status quo, but I think that a lot of them are like, yes, we're good with a couple incremental changes one way or another, then we're great. And it's like, I do not think that that's gonna work. And so really, no, it's about breaking down all of the structures and liberating ourselves. And that's, patriarchy in all its forms, colonialism, white supremacy, ableism is woven through them, but deserves its own mention. And I think that really it should deliver us a freedom to live our lives. I want trans non-binary people to not have to be afraid. And I think that all of these things really are policy choices. So it's one way to say, sure, like these don't sound like political statements, but they are. It's just baked in, and every time we do anything or work for anything, then that's how we change it. And I think that, I mean, transforming these systems from the smallest to the biggest sense of it too, because I want trans kids to not have to later work through internalized misogyny, internalized transphobia, internalized homophobia. And you don't do that unless we change the water and normalize every form of person instead of all the normalcies that we have to deal with now. So I don't know, that seems like a really downer sort of answer for a question. But I do think, in my sense of things right now, which I guess I would rather end on, is that the good news is that the systems that we have right now are incredibly rigid and therefore fragile. And the stresses of this era of crisis upon crisis, they're not going to withstand it. So that means we have the opportunity to build something better instead, and to avoid the other possible outcomes. And it's actually the right moment to be dreaming of something better and to building with each other. And community is the answer to that. And goodness, does it ever need to be the place that we have always dreamt of.
I love that you were able to take that from sort of a laundry list of problems to some sort of positivity to end on. And, coming back to the point that you made about food, and I think people don't understand how that is an issue for trans people, but I just wanted to point out one way, which is that if you don't have identification, it's very difficult to access a food bank. Just as a very simple example, they want to see a letter that was sent to your home, or they want to see a piece of identification that may or may not match how you're presenting yourself and may create issues. So that's the reason that Sage Community Food Bank exists here locally, because that is a very real issue. And all of the other ones that you mentioned are also, but just to provide some sort of context as to how that is an issue. I really want to thank all of our panelists for joining us. I'm just looking in the chat here at questions from our audience here. It looks like Quinn had a question for Joey. Joey answered it. This is a question towards you, Amanda. Do you have plans in your party to work toward wider protections for trans people and greater accessibility to gender-related care? And the follow-up here is, I believe the only two parties with trans-related promises have been the NDP, and I'm not sure if the Green Party has involvement too in that or not.
Quick answer is yes. And also we have, I don't think that historically the party has been great at sharing all of its policies, which are quite progressive and also very present on a lot of these issues, either because we've been focused on other things or just because hasn't gone out there. Also, we don't tend to get attention when it comes to things. I can say that the federal party and our shadow cabinet is lovely and cares very much about it. And I certainly hope, and there has always been a push and an acceptance to having trans-specific policies for healthcare and also for dignity, for everything. But I did manage to, without any question from anybody, post a list of policies today along with my statement. So that's great, including some trans refugee policies. But I also can say that the BC Greens have been amazingly supportive. And my experience with other parties actually has been varied, good and bad, in that some of them like to add the promises, but they do not tend to actually do some of the internal work that's necessary, but they're better at hiding it because they fully buy into all the other structures. And so because of that, they do a good job at silencing people who have problems. So I have a strong hope that we will actually be able to champion going into the future as well, because our party is fearlessly democratic, which means if you're here, it's yours.
Great. Well, thank you for your answer to that question. And this is a question from Dawn, and it's to any one of our panelists that is interested in responding to it. Dawn's curious to know what the group has to say about the Real Name MasterCard commercial. I don't know how many of you have heard about this, but my understanding is, I don't know if it was RBC or BMO, came out with a program where you could have your, I don't know if they were still calling it this, but your preferred name on your document or on your credit card or bank card or whatever it is, so that you can, I guess, without having to go through all of the added costs of legally changing your name and gender, you could have that presented on your card regardless. And MasterCard recently did a big commercial where I think you get this big black box and you open it up and inside is this fancy looking card and it has the name that you go by printed on it. So if you have heard about it, or maybe that my explanation has given you reason to comment, did you have anything to say about that?
Could I say something?
Yes, any of you, feel free.
Yeah, so when just after I transitioned at the Royal Bank in Winnipeg, the manager at the time was a queer guy. And when I went in I opened the account before I transitioned. And when I went in one day, they gave me a card with what they knew was my chosen name because he knew me. And I burst into tears. It was one of the most moving things that I had ever experienced, you know? And so, you know, these gestures are important. I think that anytime a company speaks directly to trans people like they're human beings, they are doing something worthwhile for our community, regardless of their other intentions. I think it's a very strong piece of marketing because, like happened at the Royal Bank, there are contingencies within banking to do this type of thing, and it's unrelated to transness. You know, you can do it with other kinds of names that you might have and so on, but it works for trans people as well, that you can have this name, because whatever is on the card is not your legal obligation to the money, which is in the contract that you've signed under your proper legal name. And so I applaud it. I think it's wonderful. Obviously, all of these things are going to come with the company patting themselves on the back. But in this particular case, I think it's a great win for the community. And I mean, I guess I have to throw in the general leftist caveat that a credit card company can never be good and capitalism can never be good. But barring that, good for MasterCard.
Thank you very much. Anyone else here?
Yeah, I was going to jump in. Everything Laura just said. And I just wanted, you know, I do think, you know, it is a marketing thing for sure, but also, you know, it can be a real risk for a company. And I go back to 2015, I think it was 2015. Yeah, 2015. Microsoft approached my trans child and I, and had us do essentially a commercial for them, and that was huge at the time for them to do that, because I mean, not only were they putting a trans person front and center, they were putting a trans child and an affirming parent front and center. They received backlash for that. Absolutely, they did. But it also, they felt it very much worked with their company, you know, core values, and it served to educate, it served to empower, and it served to reach marginalized communities. And, you know, like, yeah, it was absolutely, I think, overall for them to make money, but it also raised a lot of awareness. And so I think there's sort of a, you know, we have to approach these things carefully, but also, you know, I could see that they really wanted to do good with it. So, you know, you sort of look at I think with the MasterCard thing, it's the same kind of thing. I know a number of trans people who are very afraid to show ID because it does not match up with how they identify today. And it would be very difficult for them to get that ID for whatever reason right now, depending on where they live, their financial situation, living situation, for them to change that. So when you have something like this that makes it easier, I think that's great. And now more people will know about it. So, you know, good on MasterCard.
I want to add something to this too, if that's all right.
Go
Because
for it.
I saw the commercial and I went through like a full-on roller coaster of extreme emotions. Good and bad, just every direction. Starting with like the truth of it, which is it's a great thing for people actually in practice. But I wanted to throw something at the screen. I was like, how dare you use us? How dare you not just pat yourself up on the back, but prop yourself up as a progressive organization when you are funding the destruction of the world and things that support our existence. And then I was like, oh, what lovely people. I'm glad they have a stage and it's so like nice to see them. And then I went back to like, you know, this horrible feeling in my gut. So I hope it's a step to normalizing doing this for people. I'm glad it's happening. I am glad that people actually got to be there. But then once I also saw the beautiful people, I was just like, I hope this doesn't end up in ridicule. So I also was worried about that. And so, and I have a permanent disdain for companies making profit off while not actually doing the transformational things. So I have all the feelings, I stand by all of them.
I mean, I kind of liken it to the commercialization of pride, right? You'll get people sort of on both sides of the coin when it comes to that, because on one hand, you know, why are big businesses involved in this? Like, what's the point other than to, you know, prop up their bottom line? But at the same time, that money gets used by queer communities to do a lot of good. So there's upsides and there's downsides to it.
Can I just say something if that's okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I don't know whether it would be obvious or not, but I haven't seen this advert because I'm from Turf Island. It's delightful here. But I found it interesting that people were talking about the cost of changing the name, because one of the ways in that England is actually progressive that people don't know, it's completely free of charge to change your name here legally. You just need a document signed by 2 witnesses, and then you have legally changed your name. That will be accepted at banks, that will be accepted like with driving licenses, not with your passport, because you need a letter from your gender doctor to say that you are definitely one of the transes, and then they'll give you your passport. But you can just, you're welcome, Amanda, just on the comment about Turf Island. But yeah, you can just change your name and then bam, it's done. So this whole thing about being affirmed with a card, you would be able to just change your name and not have a nickname or a preferred name on your card if you haven't got that changed yet. But one advert that we did have in the UK, which was absolutely the most performative, capitalist, painful thing I have ever seen in my life, was a Starbucks advert of a young trans boy practicing his new name, going, I'm James, I'm James, I'm James, I'm James. Then when they call out his name, he takes the cup. And this is 100% Starbucks noticing that that's what trans people are doing. Because trans people were trying out names by going to Starbucks and having their name on coffee cups or any other coffee place where they do the whole name thing, just to see how it feels to be called by that name. And then Starbucks went, I think there's some money in this for us. Did you know that we can use them and then they'll come to us and give us the money? And it was never about we're being accepting. It was all about how do we get them to come to Starbucks. But when it's MasterCard, and again, yep, credit card, capitalist, evil, I get it. But MasterCard and Visa are pretty much the only or like the main cards that people use for any kind of financial services. It's always Visa or MasterCard, Visa or MasterCard. So if we don't have a choice, like I have a choice to make my own coffee in the morning, but I don't have a choice with the fact that my credit card is MasterCard because that's what I have to use to pay for things. So if they can show the acceptance, that is good, but absolutely we know secretly why. So it's like, it is good for trans people, but it's not good for MasterCard in the way that they want it to be. And I feel like that sums it up.
One of the other things that's useful, I think, from an activist standpoint is, you know, they put their cards on the table and then you have a venue, even as a private citizen, to approach them and ask them how many transgender employees they have working presently at their company. And they have some responsibility to answer you because they've laid down the gauntlet that they, you know, are trans positive. Whereas if you just come at them and they haven't declared it that openly, then it might seem a bit pushy or irrelevant, or it's certainly easier to ignore. But if you send an email to the marketing department and ask them that specifically, they would feel some responsibility to respond. And if the answer is 0, then you have a little bit of an inroad there to do some activist work with the company. And so in that way, they do at least invite scrutiny. and we can use that in a positive way, even if we don't fully support the actions of their performative activism towards us.
Thank you all for quite a wide range of perspectives on that question. So I do have one more question in the chat, and I think I'm going to have this be the last question that we ask, because it is getting a little bit late, especially for some of you. So that question is from Quinn, and it says, how do you connect with your local community during these days where COVID keeps us separated from our support bases? And feel free to just jump in if you have an answer to that, or maybe if you saying no, I don't actually have community these days.
I'll jump in just because, like you said, it's past 5 a.m. So I don't know how long this battery is going to be running for. I sort of got the little low battery popping up on the top of my head.
We'll get you out of here as soon as this one's done.
But I'm actually very lucky. Kind of like how Amanda described themselves as like patient zero in the gender apocalypse of Canada. I kind of have this little running joke that I was patient zero because I came out, as I said, in 2008, and it was right before there was this whole trans visibility that suddenly burst out. So I was sort of on my own slugging through, not being seen anywhere for a few years until suddenly there was this visibility. And when the visibility in education and all that came out, quite a lot of my friends came out as trans afterwards. So we kind of have this joke that I was patient zero, transed all of them, because, that's what us evil transes like to do. But because of that, I'm lucky that I have quite a lot of close trans and queer friends around me. Like my Dungeons and Dragons group, we've only got one token cis het, and that's the DM, so he's just there preparing the story for all of these like queer people, like let's roll dice. And again, like being on TikTok and being visible as a trans person means my comments are always flooded with trans people. So I'm always seeing people going through the same stuff as me, even though there will be the odd, horrible bigot that you need to just block or boot out. There are so many people like us, and we are so strong because we've been through crap. We are weathered. And when you're that weathered, you build a better protection, And when you have so many people that are linked, I went a little bit, I'm being consumed by the trans flag. But when you have that many people that are linked together to the point that I become the trans flag, that strength, just, you can't beat it. I think that because we are such a strong community, we are quite lucky that we will have strong connections. Sorry, my cat's here. That we do have these strong connections. At the same time, of course, that there are going to be people that don't. I do remember how lonely it was for those few years when people didn't know about trans people. But again, it's like a comment I just saw: if there's no community, we make one. And I think that that's the beauty of gender diversity, that we will find each other. No matter what happens, we will find each other and we will create this support network that we all need.
Oh, yes. I'll jump in really quick too, because it's after midnight now. 45-year-olds need to be in bed 2 hours ago. So what I've been doing a lot of is I did this wild thing, and I opened my DMs up to the public on Twitter. Ooh, right. You would think that would be terrible. I've got some filters set, but I have had some of the most meaningful, life-changing, perhaps with people, conversations one-on-one, people who are some local, some not, who are very isolated, who have been very isolated for a number of reasons over the course of the pandemic. And So that's one way that I've been trying to stay in touch and build community. It's just, I've always said, like, you can't help everyone, but you can help someone, right? So that's sort of what I've been doing there. In terms of the local community organizations, I miss them. I miss going to things. I miss seeing people on the actual face. I've been doing some fundraising and I've been donating to them. That's what I've been doing. So when I see that one is struggling, I will, boost their GoFundMe, maybe try and get them some media attention, and try and keep them afloat during the pandemic so that people have something to come back to after, because a lot of us really need that one-on-one contact and that group contact again. And so that's my way of staying connected, figuring out what is needed in our community in Ottawa and sort of the area, and how to keep those services running. There have been a lot of quiet cuts, silent cuts, and I think it's really good to check in on local organizations because they'll often feel the impact first. So that's it, I guess. That's what I've been doing, but I really can't wait to get back out to a Pride or something, please, something.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are feeling that as well. If I'm not hearing anyone else chiming in, I'm going to start wrapping this up here. So I just want to extend a huge thank you again to all of our panelists for joining us, and also to everyone who has come and watched this. Hopefully you've managed to gain something from the conversations tonight. And I also want to let you know about a yearly Trans Day of Visibility initiative that Divine, which is the organization, the trans advocacy organization that's hosting this tonight, takes part in. And I touched on this at the beginning, but this past Monday, we delivered some packages to every MLA in the province. These packages contained trans and non-binary resources, and we're encouraging MLAs to meet with trans and non-binary constituents in their respective ridings. So the goal here is that we want our MLAs to consider the impacts of legislation they put forward on the lives of trans and non-binary people. And if you'd like to help, please contact your MLA, let them know that you'd like them to participate in Divine's initiative. And if you're trans or non-binary and you're willing to help them, maybe consider putting yourself forward as a person that they can consult with, and or provide them with some feedback regarding your experiences in their riding. And we're hoping that every year we're going to see more and more MLAs participate in this initiative, because we haven't had a lot of participation year over year, and we know that it could be significantly better. So if you're able to reach out to your MLAs and encourage them to participate, that would be amazing. So thank you all again. And I hope that you all have a great rest of your evening, if you have a rest of your evening left.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It has been an absolute delight. Have a lovely day of visibility, everyone.
It's so nice to see so many wonderful faces.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.